I am from a social justice organisation called Global Justice Now, and as the name suggests, we normally work on global issues, especially of the global south, developing world issues. But we took a position on the EU referendum. We went out to our members and we consulted to see what they thought, and they were overwhelmingly in favour of us campaigning to remain in the European Union because of the global significance that they were concerned a Brexit vote would have in fueling the kind of right-wing surge, not just in this country, but all around the world. So I'm a firm Remainer personally, but my organisation was also of that view. And we continue to think the best option is to remain. And we need to discuss how that's going to come about. A people's vote seems to be one likely route there, and I suspect many people in the audience agree with that. And if you do, it's been quite a good week for us. So, amid all of the complete chaos and political breakdown at Westminster, we should congratulate ourselves if we've been out campaigning for that this week. But I'm also a very critical voice, despite being a Remainer, of the European Union and of some of the policies that the European Union enacts and of what I believe is the direction that the European Union's going in. And part of that is because of trade policy, which I'll go on to explain. But first of all, I spent much of my life campaigning against various things the European Commission's trying to do, including TTIP. People know about TTIP, the EU-US trade deal, which we defeated, thank goodness, because it was a huge threat to everything from our food standards to the NHS, but also to the way the Eurozone treated indebted members, especially Greece. The disgraceful austerity measures imposed on that country, a man-made depression that caused immense hardship for so many people and continues to do so. And finally, of course, we also work on immigration and trying to defend free movement and the rights of migrants. And of course, the barbaric immigration policy at Europe's borders. Let's not forget we live in a continent which has allowed thousands of people a year to drown in the Mediterranean Sea directly as a result of our immigration policies, despite being one of the richest parts of the planet. And I don't say any of this to try and convince you to give up on remaining in the EU, far from it, but to say that for me, Remain is not enough. Remain on its own is not enough. And it's not enough because as an internationalist, as someone who thinks the world is much too unequal at the moment, as someone terrified by the rise of Donald Trump and the populist authoritarian right around the world, I think we need to recognise that the policies of the EU, as well of course of the policies of the British government, have played into the current disastrous politics that are rising all around the world. And that to win a new vote on Remain, we can't just go back to the people and offer the status quo, which I think is what people felt they were being offered last time. We must offer hope, we must offer change to the people of this country, as well as working with our friends and allies and comrades across Europe to change things there. Because Brexit and Trump didn't come from nowhere. They didn't just fall out of a clear blue sky. They came from in my opinion, the economic policies, the financial system, which have kind of turned our world into a gigantic marketplace where everything that we care about is just a kind of commodity to be bought and sold. That's at best. At worst, it's a trade impediment to be taken out of the way. That was one of the points of TTIP. And as a result, people around this country, and you will know I'm from the Northwest too originally, I'm from Warrington, and certainly in the Northwest, but in the Northeast and in every part of the country, there are people suffering incredible poverty. And while the richest in the world have done incredibly well out of the system that's been created over the last 40 years, others have seen their communities hollowed out, their jobs outsourced and offshored, their town centres broken up and sold off to transnational corporations, and people feel marginalised because they really don't have any say over their lives or their communities anymore. Now, of course, that's not the only reason for Brexit. There were horrific levels of racism and anti-migrant sentiment whipped up during that campaign, and we're absolutely right to call that out and fight against it for everything that we're worth. Just as importantly, a reason for me to still believe that remaining is the best option is, of course, Brexit will do nothing at all to make the lives of those already suffering any better. In fact, it's going to make it far worse, in particular if the hard Brexiteers like Boris Johnson, Liam Fox, Jacob Rees-Mogg get their way and are in charge of what happens next, because their agenda couldn't be clearer. And again, it's something I think we should talk more about, and it's something my organisation tries to. What they want to do is to use trade deals post-Brexit, especially a trade deal with the United States, to deepen deregulation and liberalisation in this country. In that sense, Nigel Lawson is absolutely right, and I've never said that before, but when he described Brexit as the completion of Margaret Thatcher's project in the Financial Times, that's how they see it. And they see the shock of Brexit, even a no-deal Brexit, as potentially being a useful thing in enabling them to force those kind of policies onto this country. Currently, Liam Fox, who's a signed-up member of this group of economic fanatics, is touring the world, talking to every authoritarian, populist and repressive regime he can find to try and negotiate deep trade deals with those regimes post-Brexit. He spent a lot of time in Saudi, in the Gulf, Turkey, the Philippines, which is currently run by a really murderous thug who Fox had a press conference with and talked about all the values that we share with his government. Brazil, of course, which now has a neo-fascist president. And last week, Liam Fox, I don't know if people caught this because it wasn't properly reported, even said that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, he would drop all tariffs across the board to zero. Well, that's the end of all but the very biggest farmers in this country, and it's the end of much of our industry as well. So quite right, Thatcher's project completed. Now that's okay for Fox, he doesn't care about that. Of course, he believes our food can be imported from Africa and manufactured goods can be imported from China, and every public asset that remains can be sold off at fire price sales to Rees-Mogg's investment clients. And what is left for Britain? Well, Britain, in his vision, will become the financier to the whole world, the financial centre of Africa, Asia and Latin America. And indeed our aid budget, which is supposed to be the bit that is good about what we do to the rest of the world, is already being plundered to try to position the City of London as the premier financial hub for developing countries. It will become a place where you can speculate and trade derivatives not allowed in the EU, a perfect destination for the world's oligarchs and financial elites to live. An exaggerated version of what we already have. And Britain will become, as a result of that, an even more radically unequal country than it already is. London sucking wealth out of the rest of the country, the very rich sucking the value out of the lives of all of us. And the only non-financial jobs that will be left, of course, will be call centre operatives, cleaners, baristas, the kind of low-skill, low-education jobs that kind of economy depends upon. And our zero tariff regime would be accompanied by zero standards glued into place by the trade deal with the United States, which I think will be a kind of TTIP on steroids. Only last night, about 11 o'clock, the United States released its trade objectives for negotiations with the UK in that post-Brexit deal. And as expected, it includes allowing meat farmed in atrocious conditions into UK markets, undermining farmers here. It contains provisions to undermine the NHS attempts to control the price of medicines and hand more power to big pharmaceutical corporations, and it would allow big technology companies to use and abuse our data at will, breaking with the new regulations on data that have been agreed in the European Union. So a really horrendous agenda. And unfortunately, we don't even know what the UK's trade objectives are because we're not allowed to know, because the way that trade deals are negotiated is behind closed doors. I was very, very critical of the way that TTIP was being negotiated in the European Union, but I have to say it looks like a paradise of democracy compared to the way that trade deals will be negotiated post-Brexit. And we're fighting very heavily at the moment in Parliament to try to force the government to introduce some kind of democratic scrutiny process so that MPs can actually scrutinise what the Secretary of State is doing as he goes around the world, and to stop trade deals if they're not in the interests of the British public or of our planet. At the moment, MPs cannot do that. They do not have the power to stop trade deals, however much they dislike them. So it's a complete democratic black hole that we've got to try to reverse and stop. So I want to stop all of this. That's why I want to stop Brexit. But as I say, for me, it's the first step, not the last. Because if we look at the EU honestly, we can see that much of the EU itself is imploding, with the extreme right rising nearly everywhere, in nearly every country in the European Union. We can only stop Brexit with a message of hope, and we can only prevent this decline in the European Union with a message of hope and change, shoulder to shoulder with our allies across Europe. I think we need to remember what, for me, my grandparents' generation did after World War II, to remove our society from the clutches of big finance and big business by creating trade deals that work for people and planet, with a radical redistribution of wealth and power across Europe, with a new Green Deal to create jobs while also massively decarbonising and saving our species' existence on this planet, a war on tax dodging corporations and tax havens, handing massive new powers from the centre to local communities and local government, and a refounding of the public sector and the welfare state, so that the basic needs we all have as human beings are protected from the wiles and whims of the international marketplace. I believe that type of agenda could win a referendum in favour of Remain. I also believe it's the only way to prevent the collapse of the European Union and get us a step closer to the original idea of the European Union, which was dreamt up by those anti-fascists and socialists at the end of the Second World War. That's why my organisation helped to set up and support Another Europe is Possible, which is campaigning for a people's vote. Together, I think we are getting to the stage, hopefully, where we can begin to win that, but to win, as I say, not just to remain, but to radically transform Britain and to radically transform Europe. Thank you.